Melchizedek the Jew, with a story about 3 rings, avoids a most dangerous trap laid for him by Saladin. Neiphile's story was well received by all the company, and when she fell silent, Philomena began at the queen's behest to address them as follows. The story told by Neuphile reminds me of the parlous state in which a Jew once found himself. Now that we have heard such fine things said concerning God and the truth of our religion, it will not seem inappropriate to descend at this juncture to the deeds and adventures of men. So I shall tell you a story which, when you have heard it, will possibly make you more cautious in answering questions addressed to you. It is a fact, my sweet companions, that just as folly often destroys men's happiness and casts them into the deepest misery, so prudence extricates the wise from the dreadful perils and guides them firmly to safety. So clearly may we perceive that folly leads men from contentment to misery, that we shall not even bother for the present to consider the matter further, since countless examples spring readily to mind. But that prudence may bring its reward, I shall, as I have promised, prove to you briefly by means of the following little tale. Saladin, whose worth was so great that it raised him from humble beginnings to the Sultanate of Egypt, and brought him many victories over Saracen and Christian kings, had expended the whole of his treasure in various wars and extraordinary acts of munificence, when a certain situation arose for which he required a vast sum of money. Not being able to see any way of obtaining what he needed at such short notice, he happened to recall a rich Jew, Melchizedek by name, who ran a money-lending business in Alexandria, and would certainly, he thought, have enough for his purposes, if only he could be persuaded to part with it. But this Melchizedek was such a miserly fellow that he would never hand it over of his own free will, and the Sultan was not prepared to take it away from him by force. However, as his need became more pressing, having racked his brains to discover some way of compelling the Jew to assist him, he resolved to use force in the guise of reason. So he sent for the Jew, gave him a cordial reception, invited him to sit down beside him, and said, O man of excellent worth, many men have told me of your great wisdom and your superior knowledge in the ways of God. Hence I would be glad if you would tell me which of the 3 laws, whether the Jewish, the Saracen, or the Christian, you deem to be truly authentic. The Jew, who was indeed a wise man, realized all too well that Saladin was aiming to trip him up with the intention of picking a quarrel with him, and that if he were to praise any of the 3 more than the others, the Sultan would achieve his object. He therefore had need of a reply that would save him from falling into the trap, and having sharpened his wits in no time at all, he was ready with his answer. My lord, he said, your question is a very good one, and in order to explain my views on the subject, I must ask you to listen to the following little story. Unless I am mistaken, I recall having frequently heard that there was once a great and wealthy man who, apart from the other fine jewels contained in his treasury, possessed a most precious and beautiful ring. Because of its value and beauty, he wanted to do it the honor of leaving it in perpetuity to his descendants, and so he announced that he would bequeath the ring to one of his sons, and that whichever of them should be found to have it in his keeping, this man was to be looked upon as his heir, and the others were to honor and respect him as the head of the family. The man to whom he left the ring, having made a similar provision regarding his own descendants, followed the examples set by his predecessor. To cut a long story short, the ring was handed down through many generations till it finally came to rest on the hands of a man who had 3 most splendid and virtuous sons who were very obedient to their father, and he loved all 3 of them equally. Each of the 3 young men, being aware of the tradition concerning the ring, was eager to take precedence over the others, and they all did their utmost to persuade the father, who was now an old man, to leave them the ring when he died. The good man, who loved all 3 and was unable to decide which of them should inherit the ring, resolved, having promised it to each, to try and please them all. So he secretly commissioned a master craftsman to make 2 more rings, which were so like the first that even the man who had made them could barely distinguish them from the original. And when he was dying, he took each of his sons aside in turn and gave 1 ring to each. After their father's death, they all desired to succeed to his title and estate, and each man denied the claims of the others, producing his ring to prove his case. But finding that the rings were so alike that it was impossible to tell them apart, the question of which of the sons was the true and rightful heir remained in abeyance, and has never been settled. And I say to you, my lord, that the same applies to the 3 laws which God the Father granted to his 3 peoples, and which formed the subject of your inquiry. Each of them considers itself the legitimate heir to his estate. Each believes it possesses his one true law and observes his commandments. But as with the rings, the question as to which of them is right remains in abeyance. Saladin perceived that the fellow had ingeniously sidestepped the trap he had set before him, and he therefore decided to make a clean breast of his needs, and see if the Jew would come to his assistance. This he did, freely admitting what he had intended to do, but for the fact that the Jew had answered him so discreetly. Melchizedek gladly provided the Sultan with the money he required. The Sultan later paid him back in full, in addition to which he showered magnificent gifts upon him, made him his lifelong friend, and maintained him at his court in a state of importance and honor.